So, let's go ahead and get started. Questions. Let's do questions again. Is there anything you guys want to know that I haven't talked about or haven't implied that I will eventually talk about?
I saw on a previous syllabus.
Yep.
Thank you. Things about Sanderson's rules of combat scenes.
Yeah. Good thing to bring up.
Are we going to be going over those?
I wasn't planning to, but it's a good thing to talk about.
Okay.
So, fight scenes. Let's talk a little bit briefly. That's good, because then we'll do something more more writerly today before we get into the agent stuff. I mean, I spent a lot of time talking about agents and about publishing and things like that, which is always, hi Jane, a little bit odd to talk about in the class because really what you need to be doing is writing really well. Nothing else really matters that much for the vast majority of you. However, you're not going to get this anywhere else, okay? And that's why I spend a couple of weeks on it. Thank you. And that's why we will talk about it a lot, and I bring the contracts and things like that because this is the stuff that's really hard to get information about. But I want to get across to you. Writing really well is king, all right? That's what you really need to be focusing your attention on. And if you learn to write really well, you'll figure out on your own eventually what to do with that good writing. But I remember when I took this class, I kind of figured out some of the things I needed to do to become a good writer. I knew that I needed to practice, but the publishing stuff was just something I'd never had anyone sit me down and talk to me about. So that's why we'll spend time on it. But I do like the fact that I do like when I can to emphasize that, and you give me an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the writing. So we'll do that, and then we'll get into agents and all that stuff that we're gonna be talking about the sort of nitty gritty and whatnot. Fight scenes. Fight scenes are hard. The reason that fight scenes are hard is we have been raised to view fight scenes in a certain way because of the media that we consume, the films, the television shows and whatnot. And the problem there is that an action sequence in a film can be so visually appealing that alone holds our interest. Has anyone seen a Jackie Chan film with an extended fight sequence? Right? Even the classic Hong Kong ones, they'll go for 20 minutes and you're there the whole time. If you tried to do that same thing in a book, it would get very boring very quickly. And so a lot of people that write fight scenes, newer authors that write fight scenes, tend to write them exactly like they've seen them in films, and the scenes are mind-numbingly boring. All right? And so I want to get that across to you. You can't just do what a film does. Instead, you are a writer, and you can do things that a film can't do. What can you do as a writer that a film can't do?
Get in the head.
Okay, get in the head.
You can put a pause in the action to explain something.
Okay, you can. You may not want to, but you can. It is always your option that you have more control over the pacing. Pacing control. All right, what else can you do?
World building.
Okay. Well, what do you mean? They can do world building in a film.
Well, I mean, show. Well, yeah, it's true. Show off the magic system.
Yep.
Whatever.
But they can do that just as well.
Yes, you're right.
Okay.
Bring in other senses besides visual.
Okay, other senses. Good. Okay. That's getting to the core of it, though. We can go ahead.
You can choose exactly what the reader sees and what they experience.
Okay, I would say you could do that in a film too. You can by the angle of your shot and things. But yeah.
You might be able to get away with more blood and violence because you don't need to worry about.
Yeah, there's no MPAA on it.
Okay. That's a good one to bring up.
Well, maybe he means in detail. You can get into greater detail.
Because I mean,
you can do that all in a film too. It affects differently. And so you have greater control. I suppose you can say, and this might piggyback on what you say, you can choose in what detail to describe what is happening. And so that you can, descriptive power. For instance, you know, the amount of attention to detail you give to certain things and of a graphic nature can, you know, in a film, it is a little bit harder to fudge those things. You show it and it's brutal. You can gloss that over in the book if you want to and not have to go into the vivid detail. So I guess that is an advantage that you can do. Though, yeah, okay.
Just on the same note, you can also withhold certain types of information by the way you describe a scene.
Yeah.
Whereas in a movie, when you show a scene, you kind of have to show everything that's right there. Whereas
Okay.
in the book, you can kind of withhold things.
Okay, good. We're gonna stop with this right here. We could go on forever on this, but I want to point out this one is probably the big one, specifically with thoughts and emotions. Now we have to be careful to be, you know, following our rules of show versus tell. But at the end of the day, if we want to say that someone is angry, we can say that they're angry. You can use that shortcut. And you can give their thoughts, you can give their emotions, you can follow their lines of reasoning. And so a good fight sequence in a book, there's a few things you want to do. You are at a disadvantage because it is not a visual medium, but an imaginative medium, which means that your blocking really needs some attention in your fight scenes. Blocking is a stage term to describe where people are in relation to one another. And usually blocking is not super important. It's of moderate importance in a book. If you have some people, you know, in a sitting room having a conversation over tea, knowing who's sitting right next to whom is probably not essential for that scene, depending on, you know, things like, you know, who's handing what to what. You know, they're all at the table, they're having conversations. That's probably, you don't need it. But in a blocking, knowing where this character's standing in relation to this character in a fight scene becomes much more important. And so a lot of the problems with writing a fight scene is that people either skimp on the blocking, or they think that because they need to make sure their blocking is solid, they then go into a blow-by-blow. A blow-by-blow is generally going to not work as well in a book as it does in a film. This is the Jackie Chan principle, right? Watching him pull off cool flips and kicks is awesome on film for an extended period of time. It gets really repetitive and boring in a book. That's not to say you can't do it, and a lot of action stories will do it. The more you move toward, you know, an action-style story, the more you will see this. If you read Bob Salvatore's books, he will have a lot more blow-by-blow than you will find in a Jane Austen book. Okay? But what you've got to remember is this, by its nature, is not as effective in the books as it is in the film. So when you do this, you want to generally be active and brief in most instances. Make sure we know where people are. Try to keep your fight scene shorter than you probably think you need it to be from what films you've seen, and try to be very clear. This comes to the blocking. Once you have that, that's when you start to add what we can do in a book, which is this stuff. This is what makes an action sequence really work. Now, don't do this until you're sure that you have this down, that you're clear. That's probably, I would say this is more important, but without this, this isn't going to work, if that makes any sort of sense at all. So, this is the character making connections. The character feeling in peril. The character feeling fear, or thrill, or triumph. In other words, you are now using your fight scene to get across characterization and to check off little bullet points on your list from your plot. We're going to this fight sequence. What needs to happen? Well, this guy needs to beat this guy. Okay, great. What other 5 things can I put into that fight sequence that show character, that show off the setting, that are interesting and imaginative? Well, how can I show the character making connections, meaning show them being clever, show the character saying, okay, he's rotating on his left foot, that means he is going to come in with a feint, and if I deck him like this, boom, it'll work, and then it does. Set up a little mini try-fail cycle or a try-cycle where the character sees something and then pulls off the sequence. The idea being here, you want to highlight some of these situations. You want to do less boom, he swung his sword, and then he swung his sword again, and then he kicked, and then he punched, and then he swung his sword again, and instead have your character be thinking, okay, I need to build up to this one thrust that is going to win, because if I don't, this person has more endurance than me and they're going to beat me. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to put everything into this thrust and see if I win. And you can see how you are building in a scene like that. Instead of boring, boom, 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 you're building a rising action to a climax for that fight sequence, or to that mini part of the fight sequence. And then it fails or succeeds, and then the character's like, oh no, now my brother is in trouble over there because they've got him down on the floor and they're kicking at him, and so suddenly I have more urgency. How can I get there? Well, I'm going to take a few blows doing it, and some things like this. Don't get bogged down in this. Remember the active and brevity. But when you add these flourishes, that's what makes a fight sequence in a book really come to life versus a fight scene in a film.
How do you balance, say, a main character that the reader knows isn't going to die? How do you balance that with still being suspenseful?
How do you know? If the reader knows they're not going to die, then you might be, either you're writing a type of, usually you're doing something wrong.
Okay.
Now, the idea is that the character doesn't know they're not going to die. And yes, when you pick up a book, you generally know the main character's not going to die, in the first third. Is that what you're talking about?
For example, I started reading The Wheel of Time. Book 10 had already come out. I started number 1.
Okay,
so in the sword fights, it's like, okay, I know.
Right. That is a good question. And hopefully when you're doing these things, that's why whether they win or lose is not, I'll get to you in a second, is not as important as all of this stuff, right? If they win, what does it cost them? Okay. If you can make sure that your victories have a cost to them, even when the character wins, you're going to be setting up for the fact that there is tension to every fight. And you can't really think about the fact that people are going to read your book when the 10th book's out and know the characters on the cover.
That's not the perspective that I mean.
But if you can put this sort of stuff in so they're connected to the character and enjoying the character, then your fight sequence is going to be successful. And if you're really doing your job, you will get them to suspend their disbelief and believe that this character really could die right here. Okay. And it depends on what type of story you're writing. You may want to do certain things in your story if it's really important to you that the characters always be in peril and that the reader not know if they're going to live or die. You take a more George R. R. Martin tack toward it or something like that and start killing off main characters to say, guess what? I don't watch the show, but apparently the show The Walking Dead does this. You never know, which main character is going to be offed in the next episode because it could be any of them. That creates a certain sort of tension. All right, question over here, or comment.
Well, actually, I don't have anything else to add, but you don't have to kill your characters. You can still do horrible things.
Yes, right. Right, yeah. The idea is that in a lot of fiction, there are things at stake that are greater than the character living or dying.
Or some kind of consequence that they have to live with.
All right, over here. Yes, but it makes it a whole lot more complicated in your fight sequence. But yes, if you're going to be killing off main characters, then you definitely want to have multiple viewpoints, would be my suggestion. Generally. It can increase or decrease the suspense depending on how you use it. Yeah, would be my suggestion. Okay? So that's kind of a brief thing on fight sequences. Know that there are, I wouldn't say the majority, but there are a substantial number of readers who skip fight sequences and look at the end to see who's alive and who's dead. Anyone in this room do that? Yeah, a couple of you.
You mean just flip through the pages?
They will flip through the pages and skip the entire fight scene.
How dare you?
What's that?
How dare you?
It happens. They are allowed to read the stories in the way they want to consume them. You have to realize as a writer that this happens. And so a little rule of thumb that you can use is give a short recap of who's alive at the end of a fight sequence, just a line of "I can't believe that we lost him" or something, you can think of that if you want to. You don't have to, but do know that a statistically significant, but not by any means super large segment of the population, mostly women, skip the fight sequences. I have one in my writing group. Yeah.
If a book is really suspenseful, my wife will flip to the back page, read that first, and then
Yes.
go back to where she is and continue.
My brother's fiance does that. She always reads the last
She
page
just can't
first.
handle it.
She has to know who's alive, and then she can deal with it. So, okay. So I gave somebody a list of things to remind me to talk about, because we're talking about agents, but there's more to do. So who wrote that down and can give it back to me so I can write it up here and we can kind of have our itinerary for the day?
How to find an agent and an editor was
Yes.
what you wrote.
Okay. Agents, finding them. I think we were going to talk about publishing platforms. I believe I mentioned that. Was there anything else I put on that list?
Film deals.
Film deals. Yes, you're right. All right, film. Okay. This is a pretty meaty group of topics for us to get into. Let's launch into it with agents. All right? Agents. Agents have, because of, they have a somewhat sketchy reputation among some people. This is mostly caused by a lot of the agents in music and film, where the agents tend to get a certain reputation. In books, agents generally have a better reputation. Most authors I know are at least moderately pleased with their agents. Agents do have a reputation, a fairly good reputation. When I was first breaking in, there was no talk of agents being even really very bad. It was all very positive about agents. In the last 10 years or so, there's become there's a greater sentiment of resentment towards some agents as certain things happen more and more in the industry as the shift to ebooks has impacted the industry. So I'll talk about some of those things. But first, I'm going to kind of approach it from the classical aspect of why would you want an agent? What does an agent do? Who is an agent? So what they do. So your agent is going to be your publishing partner. Usually you will sign with an agent under a simple contract. Let me invite this over here, agent contract. An agent contract, when I signed with my agent, simply said, I agree to let the agent represent my work, and I will give them 15% of any deal negotiated. And the only other thing it said is either one of us can end this arrangement with 30 days notice. So ending. There's some things to understand about this. In my agreement to work with my agent, I basically agreed to let them handle all of my books. It's not that straightforward, however. I know a lot of people who will say to the agent, I want you to handle this series only, or I want you to handle my adult books, and I'll find someone else for my children's books, or things like that. Our agreement was just basically a handshake. You represent my books. I do my own short fiction. Wasn't interested in the short fiction, and there we go. And if there was a book that I didn't want to the agent, we'd just talk about it, and it probably wouldn't be an issue if I wanted to do that some other way. This could be more and more something you want to consider in an agenting agreement. What you want to agree to let them represent. I think these contracts vary very widely depending on the agency. So just keep that in mind. In the old days, there actually wasn't even a contract usually. It was just a handshake. The other thing about it is, even if you end the contract with the agent will continue to receive the money from any deals he or she negotiated. Okay? So let's say they sell your first book, and then you don't like this agent, you part ways, and you go and you sell your second book to with a different agent. The first agent will continue to control this contract as long as that contract is enforced, and will continue to get 15% off of it. Okay? That's something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that usually the money goes to the agent, who takes 15% and then sends it to you. There are people online who suggest that they don't like this arrangement at all and would require any agent contract to say that the publisher splits out the 15% and sends it to the agent and sends the rest to you. This is the more, how shall I say, paranoid way of looking at it, though paranoia can be healthy. This can be a healthy paranoia. That means that you don't have to wait on your money. That also means that you don't have to account your agent nearly as much, keeping track of what they're sending you and what's being negotiated, which you always should be doing. Go ahead.
In the big picture, I mean, math-wise, does it really make much of a difference?
No, it'll be the same. If your agent is honest, it'll be exactly the same. In fact, it'll be easier for you, though you'll get the money a little bit slower because the agent will tax-wise give you a 1099 instead of each publisher giving you a 1099. So if you have multiple publishers and things like this, all of the money flows to the agent, and then the agent gives you one 1099. So for tax purposes, that one can make it a lot easier. You will get your money more slowly. Our agent contract, actually, I forgot it having here how long he was allowed to sit on the money. It was basically if a check comes in for more than this amount, I'm required to give you an overnight check worth this or something like that. Joshua's always been very, very good at this. Usually it's the next day, and it's now done just a bank transfer. We just get the money stuck right into the bank account. So there's a one-day delay, and the other thing about it is but there are people online who say they would never sign a contract that goes this way, and I can completely understand. And you just have then the publisher split it off. This really only becomes a big issue if, one, the agent is untrustworthy, which doesn't happen with a lot of the big agencies, or, which could happen, you split ways with them, and suddenly the money that you're getting has to go to somebody that you broke paths with, and they're suddenly not as, it's not like they're going to be criminal and keep your money, but your check getting to you is going to be on the bottom of the list, and
you
things
get their
like that.
secretary on the phone more than you get them.
So that's something to keep in mind. So those are the things that are going to be an agency agreement. And in exchange for that, what an agent is going to do is they're going to be a contract expert. They are going to be an expert on the publishing houses. They will also be an expert on the current state of the genre. That says genre. That means that what is selling, they will know. They will know who is buying it. They will know what sort of clauses are happening in contracts with other people, and that sort of thing. They will have a reputation. When a new author is publishing a book and they send it to an editor, and that's on the desk, and a submission from Joshua, who represents me and Charlene Harris. She does the True Blood books, meaning an agent who has huge numbers of bestsellers and dominates the science fiction fantasy bestseller list. Which one's going to get read first? The agents. So a reputation, meaning that they are a gatekeeper. So having a good agent reputation can mean a whole lot. In kind of side things, they can hold book auctions. They often are good editorially. And you have somebody kind of in your corner. They will argue for you, so you don't have to. That's actually a big one to a lot of writers. We do not tend to be negotiators naturally. We don't tend to have had a lot of business classes. Anyone here in the MBA program? I know there's a few of you that were, yeah. So you might. But a lot of us are not necessarily good arguers. And this doesn't even just come down to into contracts. It comes down to if you hate your cover and you want to get the cover changed, having an agent who can call and say, we think this cover is awful and you should feel bad, is different from you having to call your editor and say that, meaning you have someone to play bad cop, which can be really nice. Okay? For this expertise, they take 15%. 15% is not a whole lot when you're new. When you're me, it's a ton of money. But that's the way this works. They take chances on new writers, and in exchange, hopefully grow those writers to the point that they are very successful, to the point that one author is making them enough money to make up for all the ones that are not making much. Scott, and then here.
Like when you're successful and like you kind of maybe settle on a publishing house and like
Right.
what you're doing, it seems like they're offering less and less. So
Yes, they are offering less and less. But if you're never going to change publishers, I guess they are. There are still important things with the arguing and playing bad cop. Editorially, if you're going to, like, I broke into, I did a YA book this last year. I let my agent hold the auction for Steelheart and things like that, which I would not have wanted to do myself. So all of these things still apply, but they do apply in a lesser extent. And instead of paying them, $2,000 a year for all of this, you're suddenly paying them $300,000, and so that suddenly becomes a bigger deal. Now, the kind of understanding that you have is, like if I were to leave my agent right now, that would be a pretty big jerk move, because that this whole idea that I'll get with you when you're new and I'll help you out, and I still think he earns his money. He is very sure to pay a lot of attention to me now. He always paid good attention to me. Joshua has one of the reputations as perhaps the very best agent in the business, if not the very best, then one of the best. Simply because even when you're nobody, he was making sure to contact you at least once a month, calling and chatting with you about what you're working on and things like that. He doesn't ignore authors. But yeah, now he pays a lot of attention. But all of this stuff is still important. I find it worth the money. Now, if you don't, which is completely valid, there are options for you, okay, to keep in mind. One of your options is entertainment lawyer. Okay? An entertainment lawyer theoretically can do most of this stuff, but you pay them hourly instead of a percent. That means you have to pay up front, but once the contract is done, they are done. There is the argument, so they're paid hourly. There are arguments to be had to say that, in general, they will be pretty good on this one, and they will be pretty good on this one, but they don't generally tend to do as well on any of the other stuff, meaning they're not going to sell your book for you. If you can, you'll have to sell get a publisher interested and have them negotiate. Does that make sense? They are not necessarily going to be an expert in your specific genre. They'll be an expert in contracts. Or they may not know the publishing houses as well. For instance, the agents are regularly doing lunch with all of the editors in their field. This is one of the things they do. But if the idea of, I might lose this, they're certainly not going to be doing editorial work for you. If I'm willing to lose this, they might do the book auctions, but in order to pay them hourly and then be done, and hopefully in the back end have a lot, this could make a lot of sense. A lot of sort of mid-list writers that I know that part ways with their agent amicably, but are just like, you're not doing enough for me. I feel that, and they're just like, all right, they will go with one of these because they already have their own reputation and their understanding of the genre themselves, and then they'll hire. Like I think Dean Wesley Smith is very big on entertainment lawyers, and a lot of the self-publishing crowd is also very big on entertainment lawyers.
Is there any convention against renegotiating with your agent?
With your agent? I have not heard of it being done, but I'm sure it can be. Anything's negotiable. But yeah, 10% used to be the standard, and it moved up to 15% in the late 90s, early 2000s. So that's one of your options. The other one is to do it yourself, which is hard, but doable, particularly if you have a background in contracts and in negotiation yourself. If you have a legal background and you can read these contracts and really know what they mean, Lee Modesitt, Ellie Modesitt Jr., you may have heard of him. He's a fantasy novelist and science fiction novelist, lives in southern Utah. He was worked in D.C. for a long time. I think he was a lobbyist and an attorney and things like that. He does all of his own contracts. Hasn't had an agent for anything except for foreign rights, which I should mention, the foreign up here. We talked about that, translation rights. They can sell to other countries and things like that. Yes?
Do you come to an agent later and just say, I need foreign rights done, can we have a contract just for that?
Yes, you can. I would go to Lee and ask him how he did it. But I also see rumblings of self-published authors doing this, getting an agent only for foreign sales. Okay, so I find this very useful, and my agent has always treated me very well. But let's talk about the dangers, so to speak, of agents, where agents can go wrong. All right, number one is there is no licensing process. That says no license needed. There is no license needed. There are some larger sort of agency conglomerations that a lot of the agencies belong to, like professional organizations, but there's no regulation on agents. You can print a business card and say literary agent. Okay? Be very, very aware of this. There are a lot of agent scams. In fact, I would say before in the late 90s, early 2000s, the number one scam that authors would fall into would be agent scams. Agent scams generally work like this. There are different forms, but you will send them your book, and they will say, well, they'll have a reading fee. Watch out for reading fees. I know a lot of agents would love to charge reading fees. The problem is that historically, charging a reading fee has meant that you make your money off of reading fees and not off of selling books. And so the entire sort of community of agents has decided we need to live on our 15% and not on reading fees, even though in a perfect world, a reading fee does make kind of some sense. But in general, what has been determined is if they charge a reading fee, you should go and walk the other direction. No matter what the situation, no matter what the contest or things like that, in book publishing, generally, you want to walk away from anything that charges you upfront to enter. There could be exceptions for that. I've heard of legitimate contests occasionally requiring like a $10 or $15 reading fee to make sure that they don't get flooded. Now, particularly with the electronic era, with everybody's backlist sending in every book they've ever written to the contest. But a lot of other ones, like the Amazon Breakout Novel Contest, are avoiding that by crowdsourcing the first level. The crowds read it, decide what they like, they vote it up, and then those become the ones that make the first cut, and then those are handleable and read. So watch out for reading fees. So that's scam number one, is the reading fee. And when I say scam, keep in mind that scam could include legitimate thieves, or it could include good-intentioned novices who don't know what they're doing and think they want to get into this agenting thing. And so they end up scamming you. And it's not a scam. I shouldn't besmirch something like that, but it ends up being the same to you. Okay? So the reading fee scam is one to keep an eye on. So the next thing that they would do is even if they weren't charging or repeating, or even if they were, they would then send you on to the book mills, which would be like, or an editorial mill, which it would be, they would say, oh, your book is almost there, but I don't do editing. I know of a really great editor, and if you pay them to fix to work with you on the book, then I think this would be legitimate for me to take. There's nothing wrong with hiring an independent editor, as we've talked about before. But the problem here is they are then making the money on a kickback from that editor, and they are not making money on selling your books. To see how that scam could work very well, you're like, oh, I'm almost there. Yeah, I need an editor. Boom, but they're sending everybody to this editor. The other thing to keep in mind about independent editors is getting advice from an editor is good. It's useful, but you don't want to go overboard in spending a lot of money doing this, because you're going to eventually have to get good enough on your own if you want to go in New York publishing that you shouldn't need the independent editor. The independent editor is more well-suited to self-publishing where you're not looking for an editor. An editor in New York will be reading your book with the mindset of, we're going to put this through revisions, so it doesn't need to be perfect yet. And I know people who will hire independent editors, again, I'm not as down on this as some people are, to get their book into shape to help them sell it. Which, there is an argument for that, but at the same time, you got to keep in your mind that no matter, how much you polish, if you aren't practicing a lot and getting good, it's not going to matter that much. You're probably better off writing more and getting to the point where you're doing it on your own. All right? But so the scams, book mills would be the place where they're like, oh, great, this is a great book. Let's publish it with, and then they will send you to a scam publisher, which is a self-publishing press masquerading as a traditional publishing press. I have no problem with self-publishing presses. I have problems with the ones who pretend to be real publishers in order to get your money from you. There is a lot of talk online of one that has a reputation for this called Publish America, who has been sued numerous times. You can go read about it on your own. The argument against Publish America type places is that they're trying to convince their authors that it's a traditional press, that their books are going to be in bookstores, that this is just like getting published by Random House or something like that. And then they publish 30,000 books in a year, and anybody basically who sends them a book. Science fiction fantasy authors tried a sting operation where they sent them a book to try and show. They claim to have these high standards. They sent them this book, which each chapter was written by a different author, and the authors hadn't talked to each other about what was happening in the book. They just wrote a chapter however they wanted, like using the same character names. They computer-generated one chapter with random words. Let the computer author it. They put like several chapters, the same chapter in, and things like that, and send it to Publish America. And they sent back this letter, said, "This is a great book. We're going to give it the chance it deserves. Even the others are ignoring it, And here's our pitch or whatever." And then they try and they publish your book for free, but then charge you like $20 a copy to get it from them. And then they try to buy. They were doing this thing where they would send your book to Oprah to be on Oprah's book club. But you had to buy a case of them, and they'd send the whole case so that everybody, at Oprah's book club could, and so what was happening is you were just being paid, and then they were just putting the postage on it and shipping it and so there were just stacks of boxes of books being shipped there by these aspiring writers who were like, yes, my publisher's taking care of me, and then they were just getting pulped. I mean, if you're Oprah's book club people and a box of books comes in from someone, anyway. So things like that. And a lot of these things do start with the agents. Some of them don't. There are plenty of places that don't. Go read through the archives of the Writer Beware blog. I highly recommend that. It's run by SIFWA and the Mystery Writers Association of America. And they highlight things like this. And you really want to jump back a few years and start to get a really good view of how this sort of stuff happens.
Also, Predators and Editors.
Predators and Editors is a good resource. Lists all the editors and agents and if they've been given recommendations by their authors and things like that. a lot of places one place that a lot of people talk about these things are the message boards of the website Absolute Right. I found it to be a very good resource. You can go on there and ask about a publisher. You probably want to search first because they probably already talked about it and say, what do people think of this agent? What do people think of this publisher? And usually there will be a thread discussing it where people have talked it over. So
That was absolute.
Absolute Right with a W. Their forums are very good. So those are just a few resources. SIFWA also does, by the way, I believe still have, Science Fiction Writers Association of America, does have some sample contracts on their websites of what a good author-friendly contract looks like. Since you don't have mine handy to flip through, SIFWA has posted some of them. Okay? So those are some good resources. So, dangers. Then there's always just the do-nothing agent. A do-nothing agent is one of these newbies who starts out and they're like, I have some publishing experience. Maybe they interned at a publisher, and I want to be an agent. And they don't have all of this, but they've got a little bit of each of it. But they really just kind of want to be an agent. And so people start sending them books, and they don't really do anything with them, and they don't know how to do anything with them. Or the agent. If an agent is not in New York, even still, if an agent is not in New York, be skeptical. There are good agents outside of New York, but they are very few and far between, because one of the things that agents do is be an expert on all these things. And part of the reason to have an agent is so that they can be your proxy in New York, the center of publishing, and do all of this stuff that you can't do because you're living outside of New York. Okay? So be very skeptical of that, the do-nothing agent. To avoid all of these things,
So, are you talking about New York City or New York?
I'm talking about New York City, but the state is okay. There are some that will live in White Plains or one of the commuter communities into New York. Most of them will have offices on Queens or Manhattan or something like that. But if they're close, you're probably going to be okay. And that said, there are a few good ones. You'll find good ones in LA. You'll find good ones in Boston occasionally, and things like this. But they're doing frequent trips to New York. Really, the only thing you can get past all of these things with one simple rule. I want to let you know what you're getting past, but there's a very simple rule to get past all of this, and that is, can you find their books on shelves? We may lose this litmus test if we lose bookstores, but for right now, any agent that you want to submit to, you should be able to go find a book they have recently negotiated on a shelf at a Barnes & Noble. If you can't, don't go with that agent. You say, well, how does an agent, oh, those poor new agents. Agents work very much by a mentoring system. The best way that you become an agent is that you work with an established agent for a while. And as long as the agency is doing this, you're probably okay. You really want to find books by that agent specifically, but if you find books by that agency, you're probably going to be okay. The other way people become agents is by being an editor for a long time, and usually when they start agenting, they will start by having a few established clients that they've worked with in the past who pick them up as an agent whose agents passed away or something like that. You will be able to find their books on the shelf too.
Where do you find in the book that says the agency or the agent that worked with it?
Usually it's the acknowledgments, but you're usually backtracking, meaning you are interested in this agent. On their website, they will list their clients. They all do. You go and you look and find those authors' books on the store shelf. If you want to know who an author's agent is, then you can start with the acknowledgments page. If it's not on there, you can Google it, and usually they'll talk about their agent on their website. And if that doesn't happen, you can send them an email. So, yeah.
Are there any agents who are more successful at being agents than they were at authors?
Yeah. I would say there are some that were authors that became agents or editors that became agents that are more successful one way or the other. It does happen. And you do want to be searching for an agent who's publishing in your genre, or representing people who are publishing in your genre. For instance, if you're representing teen, you really want someone who's had some success in teen. If you're doing sci-fi fantasy, you want someone who's had success in sci-fi fantasy. And you can backtrack that with this thing. This rule is very good. In the future, we may have to move to a, go and look at how many copies is, what's their Amazon sales rank or whatever. But currently, this is a very good litmus, and I expect it to be for a while yet. And hopefully forever. I hope that we always have bookstores, but who knows. Okay? So, that said, there are some things you need to be aware of that good agents, quote unquote, still do that may not work for you. Okay? So you can be aware. So I'm going to erase this. You guys are all aware of these sort of things. These ones are not scams, but these are things that are complaints that authors have about agents, that about legitimate agents. One is the eternal rewrite. Agents, particularly these days, will often ask for revisions on a book you send them. And they won't agree to represent you unless you do the rewrite. Some authors have therefore found themselves in a sort of eternal state where they've sent the same book to like an agent 5 times, and the agent always requests a rewrite and never agrees to represent them. That's kind of dangerous. It happens a lot. You've got to be aware of it. I'm not sure if I can speak to whether you want to just drop that agent or not, but you do want to be aware of how much time am I willing to revise to this person's editorial demand when they can't actually give me any money for it, even if they pick me up. Okay? You can find posts of people discussing the virtues, the pros and cons of this. The argument for is, well, they know editorially, they have a good eye, and if you're not there yet, they'll tell you. The argument against is, they can't give you money for it. An editor may like it just as it is, and they are too worried about ruining their reputation by sending something out that doesn't immediately sell. And so they keep asking for these rewrites that don't cost them anything and force you to keep doing this.
Do agents ever say, no, I'm just not taking this?
Yeah, most of the time they will.
So in that case, if they request for a rewrite, that means that at least you're in the ballpark.
Usually that's a very good sign.
Okay.
Getting a request from a rewrite, I would say there is no problem with the agent saying, I like this book, I think it has this flaw and this flaw and this flaw. If you look at that and say, they're right, I bet changing that would make it a better book, and you try it and it does, that has been a wonderful thing. That's what you want to have happening. It sort of started happening to me right before I sold. If you send it back and they still want revisions, and then you do them and you send it back and they still want revisions, this is where we get into questions of, is this still a good sign or not? Some authors online would say, never rewrite to an agent's editorial demands, period. They can't give you money. They are not an editor. Their job is to sell the book, not tell you how to revise the book. Others will say, a good agent has a good editorial eye, and this will help you sell the book. You have to make this decision by yourself. I would not pin all of your hopes on an agent who has asked for a rewrite. If you agree with them, go ahead and do the revision, but do be sending your book other places as well, okay? Just be aware. This happens even after you've picked up the agent. I have a friend who published a couple of books and sent the next book to the agent, and the agent's like, I think it needs to be more like this. It's a very high-powered, important agent. It's kind of hard to say, no, go ahead and send it out anyway. So they did a revision, and they got it back, and the agent's like, it's still not there. We need to work on this longer. Meanwhile, the author's like, I need to eat. Send it out, and you're going to have to decide where you kind of fit on that sort of thing. Some agents just won't send it out. Others will say, I don't think this is ready yet. If you want to send it out, we will, but I think you should fix this and this and this. I would much rather be with the second agent, even if I agree with changing what they say. But some of the very big, high-powered agents, if it's my way or the highway sort of thing. All right? So keep that in mind. The other argument about agents is there's the argument that some authors feel that the agents are not incentivized to go bigger. For instance, for the agent taking the extra time to negotiate a contract up from $10,000 to $15,000 is probably not worth their time. That's $5,000, 15% of that's several $100 on a deal that they're probably not making that much money off of anyway, when they've got all these other big authors that are making a lot of money. The argument against this is that they would want to just grab you in case you get big, and they would say the 10K is enough, and they won't fight tooth and nail for that last bit of money that to you means the difference between keeping your day job and quitting your day job. So there is the argument that no, they're not always going to look out for your best interest. It's better for them to sell 5 books at $10,000 than it is to sell 1 book at $50,000, because those 5 $10,000 books all have a chance of going super big, and the money difference between those for them is not super huge. So be aware of this argument. If you do go with an agent, the way to mitigate this, like we said, is to know the business. Keep track of your agent. Ask them, where are you sending my book? To whom are you sending it? And I want to see the rejection letters. Demand the rejection letters. Every agent should be willing to send them to you. You get to see the rejections. Then you know exactly who the agent is sending it to and what their response was. Okay? That's a way to make sure, and when they get an offer, go and kind of see, say, we should push on this. Why haven't we, I want you to go, be, one of the big arguments about authors with agents is that the author kind of, since they don't want to do this sort of stuff, just hands it all off to the agent and then doesn't even pay any attention to what the agent's doing. It's a bad place to be. You want to keep in mind that an agent is not your manager. They work for you. And though they're not an employee, you are their client, and you should be keeping tabs on them just so that you're up to date on what's happening. I'm not terribly good at this all the time. I really trust Joshua. I've been with him for, 10 plus years now. He's really good at his job. I'll often just say, yeah, go take care of this. He'll tell me, no, you need to read this contract, Brandon. You can't just say take care of it. So he tries to make me do this more, and things like that. And a really good agent will kind of be aware of that and say, here are your rejections. Here's what's happening with your career that I see. Do you want some advice? Take it. If you want, don't take it if you don't want to. The agent is there to give advice, not to manage your career, okay? Kind of underline that one. They are an advisor, not a manager. And if you kind of keep these things in mind, you can mitigate some of this stuff. Getting a very good agent is usually about the same thing as getting published. Meaning the good agents have a track record that I'd say is around an 80 to 90% sell rate on projects they pick up. They don't pick something up unless they think they can sell it. So getting one of the really good agents is a great step. That said, you can do this on your own. This is this traditional publishing week, by the way. We're not talking self-publishing. You can break in on your own. I did not have an agent when I got the offer for Elantris. That is very common in science fiction and fantasy. It is less common in children's. The reason for this being that most of the science fiction and fantasy houses are regarded in publishing as these weird things. They produce these books for those weird people that we don't quite get. And so because of that, the science fiction fantasy houses tend to run very autonomously within the larger umbrella of a publishing division, and they tend to make a lot less money than the other divisions. So the big divisions just kind of leave them alone, and they do their own quirky thing. I heard one statistic once, we're 6% of the market. I'm not sure if that's true, but generally if you look at the book market as 100%, about 50%, the majority actually, they say much more than 50%. So I'm not sure what it is, but let's just guess 60% is nonfiction. This is a guess, okay, guys? But the nonfiction market is considered larger than the fiction market. This is primarily driven by self-help, diet books. but also by celebrity books, Hillary Clinton's book, or whatever big celebrity has written a book this week. These are all nonfiction books. The life of Jimmy, what's his name, the guy guitarist or whatever, things like that. So this is the book market is nonfiction outsells fiction very handily. I'm not sure the exact percentages, but what's left over, then children's outsells non-adults very handily. I'm not going to say 60%. We'll just say nonfiction is bigger than fiction. Okay? Children's outsells adult quite handily. Children read more. Adults that read children's books adults that read books will all read children's books too. It's not a coincidence that a lot of the very big, huge, super bestsellers are children's books, like Harry Potter, like Twilight, like all of these things. Children's outsells adult. All right. So what's left over? Romance outsells everything else very handily. Okay. So the pie you can see is shrinking. All right. From what's left over, thrillers outsell everything else together quite handily. And so after you go all the way down to here at the bottom, you have the niche genres. You have things like science fiction, fantasy. You have mystery. You have all of these sorts of things where we have our fan base, but we're not considered super huge. These are the behemoths in the publishing industries. And everything else is good. There'll be some bestsellers in them, but I believe I talked about the difference between Wheel of Time and Harry Potter, right? Or Twilight. Wheel of Time is like the biggest thing in epic fantasy. Discounting George Martin, whose numbers I haven't seen since the HBO show took off, but let's just say, in the last 20 years, it's been Wheel of Time. And a Wheel of Time book, maybe sells 1 million copies, maybe 5 million in its early week. It's early time, which sounds great to you until you find out that Diary of a Wimpy Kid's opening print one was 35 million or something like that. So it's ridiculous. If you find the actual numbers, it's ridiculous how much smaller the king of our genre is than something like, Hillary Clinton's books, like 10 million copies or something like that. Or
Dan Brown.
Or Dan Brown novels, which are the thrillers, or the big romance novels, or things like that. It is dwarf us. So keep that in mind, yeah.
How much do the sci-fi fantasy shrink when you take out series books and?
I'm not sure. Series outsell non-series, but that's more about the established author name than anything else. Established authors, but that's to be expected. It's the brand.
It seems like increasingly the children's market is composed of fantastic stuff.
It always has.
So that's kind of science fiction fantasy.
Children's market is not segregated by genre, it's segregated by age. If you go into the bookstore, almost always you will find that it's grouped by age. It's not sci-fi fantasy in business terms. We're talking business today. It is children's. Different things. Okay? Yes? Jane, did you have a question? No.
Recently, Barnes & Noble started splitting YA.
Yeah, they started splitting YA because of the Twilight phenomenon, and they started doing YA romance, and I think they started doing a YA thriller or something too. Or no, it was dystopian. They do a genre for whatever's big. Paranormal romance, yeah. Yeah. So anyway, just so you know, those numbers that I was throwing out, these are ballparks. I'm not sure what they exactly are. But this is how it works. So, in other words, science fiction, fantasy, you children's people notice you're one of the behemoths. Because of that, breaking in as a new author is harder to do on your own. It's a little more corporate. There is a lot more money going around. The advances go a lot higher, but I call it variance. The variance is also much higher. The biggest books sell a lot more, and the littlest books go a lot lower than an epic fantasy published by Tor, which doesn't go as high, but it has this small dedicated fan base who And this is changing again with the ebook stuff, but for a while they'd see the Tor symbol. This is the new Epic Fantasy by Tor. I'll go ahead and give that a try. And so Elantris sold 10,000 copies out of the gate. That wasn't me. That was the nice packaging, the Tor logo on it, and things like that, and hopefully some good word of mouth. But the opening week when Elantris sold 400 copies on BookScan, that's really good. Doesn't sound good, but that's really good for a new author. That's 400 people in the nation picking up the book because of the Tor logo and the cover. Nobody bought that book because of me at that point. And so you get this sort of little wavelength pattern. So children's hard to break into, but the highs are higher. What that means is in children's, you almost always need an agent. You can self-publish or you can go with an agent. In traditional sci-fi fantasy adult, a lot of the publishers are very open to new authors. This is because they're part of the fan community. They're all a bunch of super nerds who just get together and like books. You can find them at conventions and things like this. You can sit down and chat with them, and they'll be socially awkward just like you are. And everybody's happy. And you can talk about your favorite books. You can talk about what you love. And you can end up saying, hey, can I send you my book? And they can end up reading it, and you can end up selling in sci-fi fantasy without the agent. It's actually, I wouldn't say easy to do, but I would say it's equally easy to getting an agent. They're both hard, but they're both legitimate options. In children's, you don't have that option. And I'll talk a little bit about the distinctions here. The distinction is the children's imprints of established sci-fi fantasy publishers, like Tor's imprint, are still very approachable. So for instance, if you go to Susan Chang, who's the editor of Tor Teen, or Starscape, Tor's middle grade, she's a very good editor. She goes to the conventions. She's very easy to talk to, and she will just look at stuff unagented. But you've got something with Susan?
Met her at a convention.
I really like Susan. So if you do that, if you can find those editors, because Susan's a Tor editor. She's under the Tor umbrella. If you can find, Kathleen Doherty, who's the publisher, which is Tom Doherty's daughter, for Tor's children imprint, you can actually talk to her and send something, and she'll probably give it to Susan. But you know what I mean. They're very open and friendly. So that's one way to keep in mind. You can do this in adult on your own. The thing that you want to do is you want to become this yourself. Okay? You want to be an expert on the publishing houses and an expert on the genre that you're publishing in. You want to do this on your own. I would strongly suggest that if you have any inkling to publishing in New York, you do this. If you're going to self-publish, you probably only need to start paying attention to this one, but it's probably still good for you to pay attention to this one. What you do to do this is you go and you start looking at all of the publishing houses which are consistently getting books in your local bookstore. Because once again, one of the main reasons to go traditional instead of doing it yourself is because they will get you that bookstore space, which is still about half to a little bit more, depending on your genre, of the market. Plus, statistics show, I read one today that said 40% of people who bought a book online had gone and looked at that book in a bookstore. So, books in the bookstore are still a major deal, and that's why you're going with these. So you want to go make a list of all the publishers in science fiction and fantasy, specifically the ones that are doing your genre. Hey, I'm going to help you cheat, okay? Here is a list. Tor Books, DAW, Ace, which is also Rock. I think they've started to phase out the Rock one, I'm not sure. Del Rey, which is also Bantam, which is also Spectra, I think. Am I right on that? Someone Google Spectra for me. Spectra might be a different imprint, but I'm going to, Spectra might be. But Del Rey and Bantam are the same. So look up Spectra for me. There's Harper. There's Orbit. There is Pyre. There's Bain. Very good publisher. What's that? Bantam and Spectra, okay. Harper has also been known as EOS on occasions. Who's Warner's publishing fantasy and science fiction one? That's the one I can never remember. Warner's got an imprint, and I'm not sure who it is. But yeah, just so you know, this is Penguin. This is Macmillan. I don't know if I spelled that right. This is with an agreement with Penguin. They're distributed by Penguin. They're their own. This is Random House. This is Orbit is the French the Random House. This is also Bertelsmann, which is also Holzbrink. I'm trying to remember. Harper is just Harper. So you may have noticed these two actually just combined. That was the big merger news, right? That Random House bought Penguin. Orbit is somebody else. I'm trying to remember who they are. But anyway, Pyre is indie, and Bain is indie. By indie, I mean I don't think they're part of the big six. Warner's got somebody in here somewhere. And this is Orbit. Orbit is, who are they? Anyway, it doesn't matter to you guys. Hachette. Sorry. Hachette. What's that?
Is that really how you pronounce that?
Yeah, Hachette. It's a French company, I think. Hachette. I don't think it's Hachette. I think it's Hachette. I could be wrong on that. Most of these are in Germany or France. So I think that's our big six, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then whoever Warner has. I can't remember. Hyperion. That's still in their children's. But Simon. There we go. Simon and Schuster. I forgot Simon and Schuster. Who's their parent? Are they Warner?
Is Warner Grand Central Publishing?
Maybe.
And it says that they were acquired by Hachette.
Are they Hachette? So Simon & Schuster is this. Okay. Now I think we're still missing the Warner one. I think Simon & Schuster is just Hachette's U.S. arm. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. In fact, Orbit's just their science fiction imprint. So, and Simon & Schuster doesn't have their own science fiction imprint. It's Orbit. So yeah, we're still missing Warner. Simon & Schuster is just this one. Anyway. So, here are a list of adult science fiction and fantasy, the publishers. I cannot give you this one as easily for children's, but during the break I can look up where my agent sent my book, and I can give you a list of them. But, and so that'll give you a good starting list. And I'm not, all of this stuff over here, I'm not as informed on. I could have some mistakes in here. But I do know these publishers pretty well. And these are the ones that you'll want to start with and say, okay, what are they publishing? Who are they publishing? What new authors are they bringing out? What is their style? And what are the names of the editors? I would, if I were you, write these all down and go try and find the names of all the editors who work at them and find out what new authors they've acquired lately and what those authors' books are. Go look at the books. Buy them. I'm sure the editors would love that. And start to get a feel for the different editorial houses and what they like to do.
That purchased the Time Warner stuff.
Okay, so we may be, we've got to be missing because they always say there's 6. But
there's Hachette, Macmillan, Penguin, HarperCollins, Random House, and Simon & Schuster.
Okay, but Simon & Schuster's owned by Hachette, huh?
Well, it also has Holtzbrink with Macmillan.
Holzbrink is the parent company of
right.
Macmillan, yeah. Well, who cares? But there you go. You can see how convoluted this gets. So most of these will be imprints that were started by some some publisher back in the 70s or 60s or maybe even earlier that eventually got acquired by the big conglomerates and are still run under the imprint. They may be still autonomous. They may not be as autonomous. For instance, Tor is very autonomous. DAW is very autonomous. Ace and Rock are decently autonomous. Del Rey is kind of more corporate, part of the Random House umbrella. Harper's kind of the same way. Orbit's been given a lot of freedom lately. Orbit was a big UK imprint for science fiction and fantasy, and they didn't have a US arm. And finally, Hachette said, okay, we dominate this genre worldwide, but in the US, we're a nobody. Go in, here's a whole bunch of money, buy up a lot of really great authors, and become the dominant force. So lately, a lot of the big new authors have been coming out from Orbit because of that. Pyre is Lou Anders' kind of baby. I can't remember his parent company, but Lou's a really great guy. He started this company, this imprint for the company, basically on his own, and still runs it on his own. Has a very good reputation. We don't know, the parent company. I don't know what the relationship there is. It kind of could be shaky. If the parent company goes down, Pyre would probably go down. But Pyre's treated its authors really well, so there's someone to look into. Bain is independent, half owned by Tom Doherty, who started Tor. But he's hands-off for conflict of interest reasons. And Simon, there's a lot of Simon children's imprints, but for science fiction fantasy, you're just going to send to Orbit. So start to get a feel for who all these people are and what the names of the editors are.
Wait, so why do you want to know the names of the editors, like for submitting?
Yeah, I'll get into that. Yep. So once you have a feel for how this company goes. For instance, let me just give you an example, right? Bain. Bain books. Who's read some Bain books? Does anyone here read them? What have you read by Bain? Okay, Honor Harrington. What else? Who else has read stuff by Bain?
Hunting the Corrigan's Blood.
What's that?
Hunting the Corrigan's Blood.
Okay, Hunting the Corrigan's Blood. Anything else? Anyone read Monster Hunter International? Larry Correia, good author. Bain tends to like high action type books, and a more kind of classically pulp style in some ways. In other words, they are not doing big, thick, epic fantasies. They are doing page turners. They're looking for things. A lot of books they'll publish, you'll look at, will be military science fiction, like Honor Harrington, or they will be high octane, blow lots of stuff up, like Monster Hunter. They're looking kind of for, imagine science fiction fantasy action movie in book form. And that's not doing them justice. These books are great. They do a good job. But instead of looking for big 1,000-pagers, they want 300-page fast page turners. That's kind of Bain's corner. That's what they do. They publish a lot in paperback, not very much in hardcover. They're independent, not part of some big conglomeration, and have a very ma and pa feel to the company. I really like Bain a lot, but you have to be writing the right stuff for Bain to submit to Bain.
You mentioned 300 page. What's that in word count?
Probably 90,000 words would be a good Bain. That'd be like the upper end of a Bain. I'd say that most Bain books are probably, discounting the big outliers or the big popular ones, which basically you do whatever you want, I would say most of them are probably shooting that 80 to 90,000 word range. I think Larry's longer than that, though. But your 400,000 word manuscript is not going to find a home at Bain. Contrast that with Daw. Has anyone read any Daw books? What have you read by Daw?
Killer Chronicles.
Yes, Rothfuss. What else have you read by Daw? You guys are not paying attention to your book labels. You need to be paying attention to your book labels if you want to be publishing in this sort of stuff. They also do Tad Williams. They also do a lot of your, like Melanie Ron, but I'm trying to remember who their modern ones are, but the empowered female fantasies. Not chicks in black leather kick butt. We're talking class epic fantasies, but with a female perspective. These are things that they do. They also do big epic fantasies. So Pat Rothfuss, Tad Williams, Melanie Ron's classic Sunrunner books. These sorts of things are very Daw-style books. They're very much like strong female protagonists in an epic fantasy setting. It's kind of one of their things. So that's Daw. You kind of learn this about all the publishers, okay? It's going to be easier for some than others. The reason I picked Bain and Daw is because they do a smaller number of books in a year. They're smaller imprints, and because of that, it's easier to judge what their editorial style is. It's very hard to judge what Tor's editorial style is because at one point it was 50% of all new science fiction and fantasy published in the United States was published by Tor. So Tor, DAW has like 2 editors. Tor has like 20. At DAW, it's a little less important to know the specific editors because DAW has an editorial style that they will stick to. It's the type of book they're looking to because there's only a couple of them. At Tor, there is no Tor editorial style. Every editor is basically autonomous, and they try to convince Tom Doherty to give them money to fund whatever book they're excited about. So at Tor, knowing the specific editor and what they've worked on is extremely important. Instead of sending to the slush pile, if you can send to, the editor of whatever book you love, and say, I read these books, I really like them, I think my books would appeal to you. Would you be willing to look at that? Think about how much more likely that person is to do that than if you sent it randomly to slush pile. Dear editor, here is my book. And so you want to be trying to target your books that way if you're submitting. The thing to keep in mind is you may still go into the slush pile if you haven't met some of these people. In science fiction and fantasy, networking is very useful. And by networking, I mean going to the conventions and seeing the editors on panels and kind of putting a face to the name, maybe chatting with them and asking them for some advice or things like that at a party rather than, don't hunt them down and corner them. But if you can find them at a party, or if you can find them when they've got some time in between panels and you can chat with them as a new author, you can find out a lot of things. You can ask them, what did you acquire recently that's maybe coming out in the next 6 months that I can buy to see what editors are buying right now? They love questions like that. They hate questions like, what are you looking for? Why would they not? Do you have any idea? Like if you're an editor, put yourself in the shoes. And that author comes to you, authors always want to ask this, what are you looking for? What's your response?
Something good.
Something good. Exactly. You won't want to say, oh, I only want this, because you don't want the awesome thing to pass you by. But if the author says, what have you been working on lately that you bought from a new author? What is your response? Here's this awesome thing that I love because I went through all this work to buy it, and you should really go check it out. And they'll talk your ear off. One, they're like, I just want something good. The other, they talk to you for 15 minutes about how excited they are about this new book. One is going to give you a lot more information on what that editor is actually looking for, what they find exciting, what about this new author's work really resonated with them. That sort of thing is what you're looking to do. You're not looking to go sell a book. You're looking to become an expert on the genre and the publishing houses. Now, one of the advantages of an agent is the agent has done all this for you. That's why I like having an agent. I didn't have one when I started in, so I did all of this myself. I had a book where I wrote down the publishers and the names of the editors, and I tried to find them all out, and I tried to find out what each publishing house was releasing by new authors and things like that, and what agents were doing the same thing. This is a lot of legwork, but it will give you a huge advantage over the authors who are submitting just by themselves randomly, without doing their legwork.
If we were to go to your website or check a press release, we'd be able to see where you are, say, for example, on tour. With editors, how are we to know where they're going to be and when? Say,
find out what their names are. Go to the convention list and see what the panelists are on the various panels and see if you can find their names. So knowing their names can be very useful to you. Your cons of note are Worldcon, World Fantasy Convention, the Nebula Weekend are your 3 big conventions for finding editors, particularly if the Nebulas are in New York. Some editors never go to these things. Some editors go every year. If the editor that you're hunting is not going to them, find out if the editor has a blog and read their blog. Read articles they've written so that when you send them a submission, you can say, Dear John Marco, I really loved what you wrote about magic on your blog. It really spoke to me. I think my book would appeal to you. I've submitted it. Here's the sample chapters. Sincerely, random author person. It's a way of making a bit of a personal connection and saying, hey, I did some legwork. I'm submitting to you because I think you'd be a good editor, rather than I went down the list of editors and submitted it to everyone. Now, a few things to keep in mind with this. You want to look up the submission guidelines of the publisher. If they say no unagented submissions, really, if it's one of these people, all that means is come and talk to me first. Okay? If you meet them, I've never met anyone from any of these houses who wouldn't let me send to them if I pitched to them well and they liked the pitch. Okay? Even if they're at Del Rey, which tends to be very non-agent submission friendly. There are some authors who say ignore that and submit to them anyway, because what's the worst they can do? Throw your story away. I'm not sure I subscribe to that theory, but it is worth considering. If they say no, what's the worst they can do? Reject you. So they submit to them anyway. But meeting the authors is very good. A lot of these places do have very friendly submission policies. I don't know what they are anymore. It's been 10 years since I've had to do this. So you'll have to keep up to date with it. Most of them, I think, are doing electronic submissions now. I suspect they want sample chapters and an outline, which an outline is just, if they say outline or synopsis, usually it means a couple-page explanation of your story, not a bullet point or subheading one. It's just, summarize your book in a page instead of summarize your book in a paragraph. We'll do query letters on some day later. So there you are. Yeah, Scott.
Is this process any different for agents, getting in their slush pile?
No, but the agents I know tend to be much more strict on their slush pile requirements, meaning they only take submissions this time period, they only take this type of submission, you have to query first, that sort of thing.
When you submitted your Stormlight archive,
Yes.
did you submit the first text and then also kind of a larger outline for the series?
Yes, but my submitting of it was in Tom Doherty's office with me, with concept art pitching the series to him.
Okay.
What I do is not a very good standard for what you do right now. Okay.
Oh no, I didn't. I wasn't presuming.
Yeah, but that's what I did.
Curious.
Yeah.
I have a two-part question. How worried should we be about our idea or our book being stolen? And then two, how can we safeguard against it?
Good question. A lot of people wonder it, and the answer is don't worry. People don't steal ideas in New York. In Hollywood, there is some argument that they'll steal your script idea. Here's the reason. The cheapest person they can pay for your story is you. Anybody they would hire to write that story, they'd have to pay more to. So there's no reason for them to take it. And beyond that, here's the thing you've got to keep in mind. What editors are looking for is the skill to tell a story, not the idea behind the story. We had this whole conversation about ideas being cheap. Do you remember that one? Were you here for that? Ideas are cheap. Every editor in New York sees 100 great ideas come across their desk every day. More than they can possibly publish. What they're looking for is, out of those 100 ideas, the author who actually has the skill to write it. And that's what you're selling to them. It's good to have a good idea with it, but that's what you're selling to them. So do not worry a single bit. You do not have to register a copyright. In fact, doing so marks you as a newbie. If you put a copyright mark on your thing, you look like you don't know what you're doing, because your book, once you write it, is copyrighted to you automatically by U.S. copyright law. You don't need to register a copyright; it's yours. The only reason to register a copyright is so that you can defend it in court with proof of when you copyrighted it. All of the sort of old wives' tales about how to do a poor man's copyright, they say mail it to yourself or things like that, are all complete bunk. None of them work. If you want to pay $50 to register your copyright, go ahead if it gives you peace of mind, but you don't need to do it. Okay? It's a good question, though. A lot of people wonder that.
Just another quick question on agents. Which one would you focus on as the author?
I would focus on getting both. I would not close any doors. I would be submitting actively to... If I really wanted to make a living at this, I would be actively self-publishing, submitting to agents, and submitting to editors simultaneously.
If you submit to an editor, does that close the door so that an agent who is more skilled than you cannot submit to that same editor later?
Yeah. That shouldn't be too much of a worry for you, because you should be writing a lot of books. And if that book, you go to that and you say, I've submitted this one to these editors, and it didn't sell, then they can sell the other book. And there is an argument. A lot of agents will tell you, don't submit directly to the editors, only submit to us. I think that the cost, which is that, is mitigated by the opportunity to be spending more places, and plus, most likely, an agent will have you do a revision, and they'll be able to go to that editor and say, "You remember this book? I've done a revision with the author. I think they're really hot. Plus this other plus Harper's really interested in it. Do you want to take another look at it?" And I have never heard of anybody not selling a book because they'd submitted on their own.
Okay.
I mean, Larry Correia submitted Monster Hunter International everywhere and then self-published it and then still sold it and became a bestseller, okay? So, yeah. Okay?
How do you find like reputable agents? Like, so publishers is pretty.
Yeah, you
just go to the bookstore, you look at the imprint, bam. But, like,
same with the agents. Find agents that are publishing or representing authors, particularly newer authors, because if they represent like H.P. Lovecraft, that's not a very good sign that they're and Google's your friend. This is what you're going to have to work to do this. This is not easy. This is hard. This is different from writing, which is what you want to do. But if you really want to publish and make this your job, this is what you do. I strongly suggest that you do this.
So we get out of this class, we're really excited, we finish up a book, what do we do next? Do we assume that it's drivel because we haven't practiced enough and write another one immediately?
Yeah,
Or
but
do
you
we
still
start
send it
going
out.
through these things?
You still send it out.
Okay, we do?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. You're going to send that book out. You're going to get rejected everywhere. It doesn't matter. Okay? Yeah. Because it might be awesome.
Okay.
So what you're going to finish the book and you write in this class. You are going to do a draft of it. You're going to set it aside and write something else. And a few months later, you're going to come back to it, do another revision, perhaps having workshopped it during that time, and then you're going to submit it out.
Okay.
You're going to be doing this research at the same time, but don't wait till you have all this done to be submitting. Just start submitting.
Okay.
You do want to do all of this, but just start submitting. Then if you're really serious, you're going to, you decide, I'm focusing on agents, I'm focusing on editors, I'm focusing on self-publishing, I'm doing all three. When I took this class in 2000, I was there. I went to Dave and I said, "Dave, I just finished my 6th book. It's pretty good. What do I do?" He said, "You're flying to New York next month to the Nebula weekend." And I said, "I don't have any money." He's like, "Find some money. Sell your car. You're flying to New York." I flew to New York and I met Joshua Bilmus, who became my agent. He didn't do it for a few years because he rejected my first few books. He also told me, "You're going to go to World Fantasy Convention." I said, "I don't have money for that. It's in Montreal." He said, "You're going anyway." So I went to World Fantasy Convention and I met my editor at a World Fantasy. It wasn't that one. I went to World Fantasy 3 years before I met the editor who eventually bought my books. But this was a different era. The self-publishing thing wasn't here and the ebook thing wasn't here. But that is what Dave told me, and that's what I will tell you. If you want to publish traditionally, you're going to go to these things. In children's, you are going to start going to the conferences rather than the conventions. The big difference is that you are going to sit in rooms and be lectured at instead of watching people with Klingon foreheads get drunk. I don't know which one you would find more fun, but the conferences tend to be things like the Writers for Young Readers, which they do locally, and they have a lot of these conferences. Usually every conference in children's will bring out an agent or an editor, often both. And you will buy in and get a pitch session with them. This is your best hope, I think. Well, other than writing a fantastic book and landing a great agent. But if you want to start networking, that's what you're going to do. Writers for Young Readers is actually a very solid resource. LDS Storymakers tends to bring in agents too, and that's local. And they tend to be children's agents. You also have the nice advantage in children's in that one of the best children's publishers that is not in New York happens to be in Salt Lake, and that's Deseret Book. They publish the Shadow Mountain imprint that does Fablehaven and all of those guys. They tend to like middle grade fantasy books. They do some science fiction, mostly middle grade though. And they're local, and you can meet their editors by going to things like LTUE, Life, Universe, and Everything, and things like that, which usually, LTUE is a great place to go. I love the con, but you're not going to find, Joshua Bilmus there most years. But you will find all of the people from Shadow Mountain. A lot of the other local LDS publishers should be looked at with a cocked eyebrow. Okay?
You also find a lot more of the people who are helping with self-publishing.
Yeah.
Before the
Yeah.
LTE.
Yeah. The reason you should look at them with a cocked eyebrow is a lot of them don't have very good bookstore penetration and are not doing any of the stuff that a good publisher should be doing for you. And they are well-meaning people who don't have any sort of anything real they can offer you. There are a few of the middle ones that are okay. But basically, Shadow Mountain's the only one that will pay you enough money to make a living on your writing. And even then, it's kind of sketchy for your first few books, how much you'll get. Shadow Mountain is not paying six-figure advances.
So I know in the world of nonfiction, when
Yes.
you send in a query letter,
Yep.
one of the things you do is you kind of talk up why published here. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
Do you do that with these? And if you have publication credits in other genres, do you?
Yeah, that would be legit. It's more important in nonfiction. Because in nonfiction, your credentials sell your book. In this, you want to include legitimate publishing credits, which would include the big magazines, or the equivalents in other genres, things like that. Otherwise, include it if it's relevant. For instance, if you're writing a science fiction book about a physicist on Mars, and you happen to have a degree in physics, that's a relevant thing to include. Your degree in physics probably isn't relevant if you're writing your fantasy book, or the fact that you won your high school writing contest is not very relevant. The fact that you've self-published 12 books is not very relevant unless they're selling really well. And then you can say, I have sold 40,000 copies of my self-published book. Would you be interested? They're going to say yes. Okay?
And this is the book that you published. 40,000 copies. They're interested in picking
Oh
up
yeah,
after that.
they're totally interested because you have not tapped the market that does the print books. They may not buy you, but they'll be interested because 40,000 books online says they should be able to sell that many print books at least. And usually, in the recent past, 40,000 books online probably means that with a proper marketing push and all of this sort of stuff, they'll be selling hundreds of thousands. This is why Christopher Paolini got picked up in the old days, before self-publishing was the big new thing. With Aragon, they sold, I don't know, you'd have to ask Christopher, but they sold thousands of books on their own, and Random House came to him and said, "You're selling lots of books. We can sell more." And they said yes, and so he became, and a lot of the big self-published authors are landing book deals now. And a lot of them are keeping their electronic rights, as Brian talked about, or Joe talked about, last week. All right, where did we get on this list? We got through 2 of these. That's pretty good. I have to still talk about. I'm going to put this on here. Queries. Wow. Okay, query letters. So add that to your list of things to remind me about what to do. Otherwise, I think I've covered this in intricate detail for you. Hopefully you have now a better understanding of the publishing industry and what you would go about doing when you want to publish. Really, writing great books is what you're going to do. But after that, hunting editors and agents, if you want to be in New York, you're going to have to figure out how to do that. Maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe you'll be like Naomi Novik, and someone can like... Her husband was like Stephen King's accountant or something like that. You'll have to ask her. They knew Stephen King somehow. Stephen King read her book and said, "I love this," and gave her a cover quote. And then they said, "We've got a Stephen King cover quote. Who wants to publish it?" And hands started to raise. So maybe you'll be that lucky. Or Pat Rothfuss, who I think you'll have to ask him. I think he wrote with Writers of the Future. Got a Writers of the Future, which is the big award. Kevin G. Anderson was on the judges board and wrote to him and said, "Your book is really good. Why don't we forward it on to my agent?" And he then forwarded it on to his agent, Matt Bialer, who said, "This is fantastic," and then sold it at a big auction to Daw. I don't know if it was an auction, actually. I think it was, but sold it for a lot of money to Daw. Maybe you'll have something like that. So I have passed on a few of my students' works. I think I told you guys once. It's happened 3 times, I think, to my agent or editor. So
Has anything come of that?
yeah, Jancy got published. She came and talked to you guys.
So what do you normally do with those? Do you just like read the first chapter and say, okay, this looks going someplace and send it on?
Well, no, I mean, if I work with you in the class and you really impress me, don't worry if you don't, okay? You're all at various stages in your writing. I will say, this is really good. If you finish it, I will read it. And if I like it, I'll send it to my agent. And 2 of the people I've said that to never finished their book and didn't send it to me. Yeah, I know, you're cringing at the lost opportunity. But several of them did, and I passed them on. Brian McClellan, who's publishing, is one that I passed along very good words on. He didn't end up with my agent or my editor, but I spoke very highly of him and passed his work along to them. And now he's published with Orbit. So yeah.